the thing that we wanted to discuss are the events in Ukraine. And let's say we have here three different or not so different backgrounds. Mike from the US, Alexander from Belgrade, and myself from Croatia, basically. And the topic we wanted to see and let's say share opinions and try to make some kind of a mutual conclusion is Ukraine, of course. So maybe it's very similar to the events happening here 20 years ago. So that makes Alexander and myself, let's say, a bit familiar with the development. And I mean, the US is the superpower of the world, so everything that happens is connected in some way or another. Some interesting thing to start with, probably the stated objective of the Russian invasion is to denazify Ukraine. So, Mike, you're an expert, I guess.
Okay, let me start off by saying that there's a fundamental difference between the Russian incursion into Ukraine and the NATO attack on Serbia, because NATO bombarded Serbia for 70 days, I believe. 78 days, during which time they targeted the civilian population and all of the civilian infrastructure to basically destroy the country. From the news, first of all, I have to begin this by saying we have nothing but propaganda here. All of the mainstream media are full out propaganda. But with some of the sources, from what I can tell, is that the Russians have targeted military targets exclusively, and they're doing their best to spare the civilian population. And what we have in response is the Nazis, the Azov Brigade, basically withdrawing into heavily populated urban areas, refusing to let the civilians leave through the humanitarian corridor, and basically stationing weapons where maximal damage will be done to the civilian population. That, in spite of all of that, it looks from the sources I can see here that the Russians now have taken, have neutralized 75% of the military and have taken 40% of the country. That's the situation as I understand it.
Well, the situation that I understand it kind of reminds me of the well, say first to come back with the thing in Serbia. Basically, the NATO just bombarded Serbia. True, it was a violation of the UN Charter, and they targeted civilians. But they did not introduce the ground forces, though. So basically, you have this difference. What is familiar with the let's say the Croatian war? It's the same pattern. You basically have some provinces there with the separatist forces that try to separate. You have first a very swift and quick attempt with the light forces to decapitate, to basically kill the leadership. When this failed, they bring in the let's say the heavy machinery, and they start raising the cities, like sieging one city after another. So it's basically the tactics that were used here too. So I guess it's similar playbook. But we've seen that in the attempt with very light vehicles, it was probably some sort of aerial mobile unit that tried to do a quick, let's say, change of government. It kind of failed, and now they are doing it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. Well, I would somewhat disagree with you, gentlemen. This scenario reminds me more of a war in Syria. For example, war in Yugoslavia was more complex. Basically, we had three entities fighting each other: the Orthodox, the Catholics, and the Muslims. And also, there was only one big superpower involved in wars in Yugoslavia in the 90s, that was USA. Here we have Russia and somewhat USA, although in a very passive manner. To me, it occurred to me 2-3 days ago that maybe just like in Syria, there is some sort of secret convention or discrete, understated understanding that Ukraine as a country is best for all, that it has to be partitioned. Partition is the old policy of, Eastern Europe and Middle Europe. It happened so many times. Let's remember Poland was partitioned 3 times. Austro-Hungarian monarchy was partitioned. Germany was partitioned in 1945, etc., etc. There are more examples. So that's something that happens when some country becomes dysfunctional or becomes too much of a burden for some superpower. Why I'm saying that about that, let's say, secret agreement? Well, President Biden 3 days ago said that he's going to send $1 billion of help to Ukrainian army. Well, that's a little bit, in this kind of war, of this magnitude, this is a little bit better than sending them a box of Kit Kats. The Germans decided that they're going to send them 2,700 rocket launchers. They're small portable rocket launchers, Arrow. They're called the Arrow. Well, Arrow is a leftover of the Soviet period from Eastern Germany. Half of these systems doesn't work. And those who work definitely cannot penetrate the Soviet tanks. That is not how you help your ally. That is how you actually screw the ally. But what's the difference? In the public narrative, difference is that, let's say, in the 19th century, during Bismarck, during Alexander II, Tsar, partition was something public. It wasn't a secret thing. It was just a matter of regular politics. Nowadays, in a post-democratic society full of hypocrisy, it is not nice to say that someone is going to partition the country. So that's why they're they don't talk about it in this fashion. What we see now that basically 2/3 of the Ukraine are under or going to be very soon under the Russian control, whether the western third is kind of free of any kind of battles or military actions of a bigger magnitude. Practically it's white. That is telling us that the western Ukraine is going to be passed to a NATO country, whether as a separate entity or whether as a part of Poland. And eastern Ukraine is going probably to be a separate country under the Russian control. They will happen. They will have some sort of freedom, but like Belarus, they will be under more or less, Russian control, although it won't be occupation. Now, why mention Syria? Russians, again, having some sort of agreement with Americans, secretly, of course. That's not something you say in public or loud. You stick to your story. But what happened in Syria, on the northern part of Syria, we had the Idlib province. Idlib province is a province where all these fanatical Muslim fighters types were captured and moved. And then that area of Syria was kind of sealed, so they can live and function in that little part of the territory, but they cannot function, they cannot do much damage in the rest of the Syria. Say will happen probably in the part of western Ukraine, probably in the area of western Lvov. Well, all of these neo-Nazis who survive the Russian attacks and who doesn't surrender or those who surrender will be free to move to that little section, probably around the city of Lvov. And then you will see the steel territory just like Idlib, but that might be a little Putin's revenge for last 8 years of ignoring by the Western forces and the NATO, because when you have in the middle of the Europe tens of thousands of lunatics, die-hard fanatics, they might spill in the other countries, to Poland, and Germany, and do God knows what else. Like we have in Kosovo right now, we have pretty much a state of drug dealers and organ traffickers right in the middle of the southeastern Europe. That's my view.
Okay. Well, the destiny that is, let's say, envisioned for Ukraine is that of the Belarus. So in Belarus you have things like elections, and the opposition party wins no seats, or the president wins, I don't know, 102% of votes and such stuff. Well, I mean, okay, that's the one. I mean that perspective might not be very pleasing for the Ukrainians. But let's go back. I think where this thing started, and where it has its implications is 1094, the year 94 of the Bucharest Agreement. But basically, it was an agreement in which Ukraine, then a fourth nuclear superpower, agreed to let go of its nuclear arsenal, and the three nuclear superpowers, the Russia, the UK, and the USA, signed the letter of guarantee. They will guarantee to Ukraine the territorial integrity and its independence in exchange for the Ukrainian arsenal of nukes. So basically, we have it is a bit it is a bit satirical now, but you have this thing unraveling. So basically, the three guarantors, the UK and the US, are obviously not worth, not capable of guaranteeing anything, and the Russians are basically breaking like Ukraine city by city. So, but what is, according to me, one of the objective of the Russians is basically the ghost of this Bucharest Agreement, and that's obviously the nukes. Yeah. Because obviously Russians have broken the agreement, and that by extension means that Ukrainians are not anymore obliged to be a non-proliferated country. If the Russians have broken this agreement and are basically invading the country, they don't have any obligations to be nuclear free. And I don't know if you know, like it was called R-36 Voivoda. The Americans call it SS-18 Satan. It was an intercontinental ballistic missile that was produced, huge missile that was produced completely in Ukraine. So they are more than capable of making such weapons, and the only thing they need is the fuel. So basically we will see this going on and on until Putin secures all this nuclear fuel from the 16 of the Ukrainian nuclear generators that are across the country. But okay, let's say this is more this geopolitical military aspect. But what puzzles me is the Nazi stuff. I mean, come on. So basically, we are fighting Hitler, or when you say that the Ukraine is full of Nazis, what concretely do you guys have in mind here?
We have followers. I actually, if you don't mind, Mr. Jones, I will jump in again. That was one of my next points about the nukes. That's a very dangerous issue, and that's one of the reasons why both NATO and the Russians want to solve this problem and partition the Ukraine. No one in his right mind needs neo-Nazi fanatics running with little dirty bombs, which are relatively easy to make. Second of all, Zelensky is, insane president of Ukraine. On the Munich conference on the 19th of February this year, publicly said that Ukraine is going to become a nuclear power again. That rang a bell, I think, both to NATO and Russians, and they said, this is too much. No one needs this type of people running around with either real nukes that they can produce in, let's say, 2 to 5 years from now, because as Tony said, they have the capabilities to do that, not immediately, but in, let's say, the next few years. They can produce a real serious nuke. But in the meantime, they can produce a small, dirty bomb that can, devastate a little city of, let's say, Jasper, Alabama. And that's dangerous. No one wants them. And regarding the neo-Nazis, that's a tradition from the Second World War. We have 3 major groups that Mr. Jones mentioned one of them. There are 2 other most notable groups. The other one, except the Azov Battalion, is the Stefan Bandera group. Stefan Bandera was a lunatic that was a neo-Nazi leader in the Western Ukraine. Both parents were Jewish. That's interesting. And he was, working for the Third Reich. He got Iron Cross from the Third Reich. Then he became fighting Germans at one point. He lost touch with reality. He fought Russians, and he killed 60,000 Polish civilians. He even sent his troops to Poland to kill people. And the third group is the Right Sector group, which is also neo-Nazi, and there are tens of thousands of them, and they are dangerous. Now, problem, just like in Chechnya, and just like with Idlib, problem is that the American intelligence is training and, these people to function in the name of the war against Russia. Well, at one point they decided that they did too much and there is too much danger for both sides. But yes, there are a lot, just like with the Chechens, just like with some other, conflict areas in the world. Some parts of American intelligence were involved in training and financing these troops, unfortunately.
I think that every single male in Ukraine has exactly the same training as the Russians have. So I don't think there is a necessity of some additional training. They do have the same old Soviet training that was obligatory for all the males, and you have basically the same military gear and lots of them. We are talking about thousands of armored vehicles, like millions of bullets.
Russian captured 10 Brits already. That's not known.
Okay, but I mean training. It's not necessary to train the Ukrainians.
Guys are captured right now.
I see what you were. But what puzzles me here is, Nazis. You mean like real Nazis in Germany? Like they give a pledge to the Reich, or what? What are we talking here about?
I think they're the bad, even more irrational poor copy of the Third Reich people.
So they want to do what? So we have to poison their water supply, or
Bernard George Shaw, like they're like wannabe Gestapo, wannabe.
No, I think the similarity is with Afghanistan. These Nazis are like the Mujahideen. The United States thinks they can weaponize these people, and they think they can use them, turn them off and on like a light switch. That's not the way it works.
Exactly.
This is what Liddell Hart is a very intelligent British military historian. He wrote a book called Strategy, and he said when you're dealing with irregular forces, you're always going to have problems. The British found this out when they decided to weaponize the Spaniards against Napoleon. That's where the word guerrilla comes from. Guerrilla, a little warrior, and those people just didn't go away after Napoleon was defeated, and they caused problems for a long time after Napoleon was defeated. So now you have the same situation in Afghanistan. That's where Osama bin Laden came from. He was weaponized, and then he existed wherever they went after the Afghanistan war. There was problems. So yesterday I'm at a function in Chicago, and I'm talking to this Polish woman, and she's worried about all of these immigrants coming into Poland now. They're apparently fearful that there are going to be these destabilizing elements now coming into Poland, and it will be in their interest to basically drag Poland into a war. Now, I'm also dealing with Poles, talking to Poles on the internet who are absolutely crazy. I don't like to generalize here, but these people are absolute fanatic chauvinists who are calling me a Nazi because I'm trying to explicate what happened after World War II, and saying that the Germans were victims after World War II of atrocities. You can't talk to these people, and the problem here is that this is the type of behavior that got Poland into trouble right in 1939. There were these people who felt that they had this miraculous army because of what Piłsudski did with the miracle of the Wisła, and Britain was behind them, and so they were encouraged into basically a hostile attitude toward both Germany and Russia. They wouldn't talk with them, and that led to a catastrophe for Poland. Now, this is exactly the situation that we're in now, where basically we're encouraging the Ukraine to go involved in a suicide mission. And I think that it's in the interest of a certain group of Americans to create as many casualties as possible in a losing battle, in what they know is going to be a losing battle, in order to generate animosity against the Russians and stiffen the spine of this crazy group of people in Eastern Europe who hate Russia. And are willing to go involve the entire world in a war because of their ancestral animosity toward Russia. Okay. The other part of the problem here is that you're dealing with people. I mean, I'd like to take a step back to Canada, because Canada got completely obliterated off the news cycle, just as it reached a kind of catastrophe for the truckers, but also I think for Trudeau. So
okay,
Trudeau,
I know Canada. It's the same. It's the same thing as Ukraine. You have the same Nazis in Canada with these trucks that you have. This. I mean, this is kind of like the same narrative, but from two different specters. I know it because it all happened in Croatia. You know, you have we were on the receiving side of the let's say once of the we call it the invading forces, and we were the Nazis. I mean, what can you define? You say that the Germans were victims in the Second World War, and what do you mean by saying that Ukrainians are Nazis here? Whether they have bad DNA? What is the Ukrainians' objective here? I mean, they do have their own country. And they do have the regular military.
I'm saying they're Nazis because they identify with Bandera, who worked with the Einsatzgruppen during World War II. They're using Nazi insignias. They have a kind of racial attitude toward what the Ukraine is, and so on and so forth. And they're willing to act as proxy warriors of the West in a way that the Mujahideen acted in Afghanistan. Now, if you go back to Canada,
race? You mean the black people that are having trouble? I mean, I don't buy it. This is okay. So this is not really America we are talking about. Race what has race to do with it? I mean, they are like brothers of the Russian people. What kind of race are you talking? I mean, Nazi insignia. I mean, yeah, the truckers in Canada also have Nazi insignia. So I mean, at least they say so. Okay, no, you have. I would like you to define to me what makes this. So basically, the bunch of racists, the Ukrainians.
Let me go back to Canada. Okay, the truckers are Canadians. The Canadians are the most docile people on the face of the earth. If you step on the foot of a Canadian, he says, "I'm sorry." It's a huge country. It is very sparsely populated, and these people could just go off and be by themselves until COVID. And then suddenly their livelihoods were threatened as truckers. They had to go back and forth across the border. They were talking about lockdowns, more mandates, and they had enough, and they started heading toward Ottawa. The reaction was the Holocaust. It's always going to have to take place within the Holocaust narrative. So someone showed up with a Nazi flag. Those truckers were not Nazis. I guarantee you they were not Nazis. Okay, they were Canadians who had had enough. But they got labeled as Nazis because that's the way you demonize somebody. And this is the way basically Trudeau demonized his own people. And once you're called a Nazi, then you don't have to talk to these people.
But do you think that it's impossible, the same thing to happen in Ukraine?
No, it's different. Okay,
so these are real Nazis.
So the three groups that Alexander mentioned, they are Nazis. They are neo-Nazis. They believe in that ideology,
and they like it.
They are this aggressive kind of negative nationalist group that's trying to come up with an identity by demonizing someone on the other side. And so it's really this. So right before the war starts, the Ukrainian parliament passes a law saying it's a crime now. Anti-Semitism is now a crime in the Ukraine.
Yeah, that sounds like a Nazi. Yeah.
Okay, now this is the Jews are in control of the Ukraine. The Jews created this situation. It was Victoria Nuland, who was married to Robert Kagan, who was a big neoconservative Jew in foreign policy circles here, who basically testified 2008, we spent $6 billion to radicalize. Okay, now the Jews never have anybody to fight for them. Never. They are always looking for proxy warriors. And so in the United States, in the civil rights movement, the blacks, they were the proxy warriors for the Jews. That's what the civil rights movement was. Now it comes, the crunch time comes, 2014. What's the guy's name? Yanukovych. So anyway, he is going to, he's got to make a decision. Do I go with the EU or do I go with Russia for energy? He decides to go with Russia, and then the war breaks out. This is where Victoria Nuland pulls the trigger, and they use these Nazis as their proxy warriors. So you got a Jewish-Nazi alliance running the Ukraine. Well, nobody can understand that. How is that possible? You got the ADL. You got the ADL coming in saying, no, they're not Nazis. Well, yes, they are Nazis. And the point here is that they do share a common ideology because they're both racist in some sense or other. In other words, the Jew thinks that everyone who is not a Jew is racially inferior, even if they don't talk about it that way. That's the way they feel. And so there's a natural affinity between them and some type of Nazi group. Obviously, Nazi in Germany 70 years ago is going to be different. But this is the same. They are a weaponized proxy warrior group working for the Jews who were responsible for the overthrow of the government. All you have to do is look at those Maidan demonstrations. Look at the videos of the Maidan demonstration. This was not peaceful protest. The Canadian truckers were peaceful protests. This is a revolution where they overthrew the government as proxy warriors. That's the difference. Okay,
so basically now we got, you now said some characteristics. So basically a Nazi ideology is something that thinks that his group is somehow superior, right? Okay,
is an element
that
of
brings
racial-
us basically to the let's say the old the old narrative. So as the Ukrainians are considered also described as anti-Russians, and so it's basically the religious narrative. The Ukrainians are described. You can find it in some with the Russian writers and with the Russian,
well,
let's say,
it's
philosophers. Like the Ukrainians are anti-Russians, and it's basically a religious battle. So basically, it is the same narrative that we have been sold here in the Balkans. We basically have Croatians and Serbs, Croatian acting as some anti-Serbs, and it's a religious war basically.
It reminded me of the Ustasha period in Croatia.
Okay, no, we are talking centuries. We are talking no. Ustasha is let's say Mussolini's proxy group.
Let me finish.
That
Let me finish.
okay.
As I remember, as I understand it, there were theoreticians in Croatia who were trying to come up with some type of racial difference between Serbs and Croats because of the
Starčević, Šuflaj, Josip Frank.
Okay, so there is no racial difference. It's purely a religious difference, but that doesn't mean that they didn't try to impose some type of racial narrative on basically what was a religious conflict. I'm thinking the same type of thing happens with this the latest instantiation of Nazi thought. In other words, we have to come up with some type of rationale to attack the Russians. Now, I think the whole point, once again, we're back to the missing person, the man who's always behind the curtain. So wait a minute, why do they have this ancestral animosity against Russia? Well, because of the famine, the Holodomor. Well, who was responsible for the Holodomor? Was it Russians, or was it communists, or was it Lazar Kaganovich? And what was he? He was a Jew.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think, Mr. Jones, that is going even further than that. Goes to a, 18th, 19th century Pale of Settlements, when many Jews moved to that part of Eastern Europe. Tsar gave them the land. They were expected to work, to have their homes. They didn't want to do it because, in Jewish culture, manual work is not so appreciated.
Right.
Making money out of money is something that counts.
And one other thing too. Vodka.
Yeah, production of vodka turned the Christians into alcoholics. Giving loans to local population and insane rates, and on the top, organizing anti-Tsarist terrorist organizations. Among most popular, actually most famous, was the Narodnaya Volya.
Right, absolutely.
The organization that killed Tsar Alexander II.
Right.
Then Nikolai I, I think, the next Tsar, organized a pogrom when 55,000 Jews were killed and massacred. I'm not approving that definitely, but there was a reason actually for that. It didn't happen just out of blue. And then we have, retaliation when the Marxists came and liberals.
By the way, they all came over here.
Actually, this is not my fiction. We have that in the Dostoevsky's essay on Jews, which he wrote in the 1870s, and the last book of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, 200 Years Together, which is an interesting book, and he wrote it in a very smart fashion, meaning he used for his book, in which he analyzed the history of the mutual life of the Orthodox Christians and the Jews in Russia and Ukraine. He was actually most of the time using Jewish sources, Jewish archives, Jewish historians. So he couldn't be, directly, accused of being anti-Semite. And that book is actually it was written in 1905, prior to his death. And that book, I read it. It's a pretty good book. It's not a novel, more of a piece of history. And that book actually hasn't been fully translated on the West. It had a strange history. Apparently, 8 different translators translated this book. Their names are not quite familiar. Some parts were removed. So that book on the Western market is a moot point. But on one hand, you have photography that you can prove through the work of the historians and different archives. But on the other hand, the Jewish lobby doesn't like it, whether it's true or not.
This Rabbi Marvin Fair in Los Angeles told the publishing industry in New York not to publish this book, not to publish it in English. Okay, I read it in German. I read the German. Ironically, usually it's the Germans who are more sensitive about this, but it was the Americans who basically just made sure there was no English translation of this book.
Okay, can I just maybe clear the woods here? Okay, so we have Jews. Okay, so what can we for a minute let's say talk about more like about the mechanism than like about the people. So what is all this fuss with the Jews? So they are basically the chosen people, right? I mean, they think they are. So by the virtue of being the chosen people or the holy people, automatically the people you are having issues with is like what's the opposite of a heavenly or holy people? Is the unholy or genocidal people. Or in the new secular newspeak is the Nazi. Okay, let's say it that way. So basically, you have this system or this concept, this value concept. So what we have the Russians here that are basically members of the Russian Orthodox Church. That is the church of the Russian people.
The boy.
It's united with let's say it's the same body, and so we have all the story again, but Christianized. The same story, but with a cross on his forehead. So basically, you have heavenly people that are the Russians in this case. They have this messianic destiny, like the other empire, the Americans, but they call it manifest destiny, or the city on the hill. They have their own messianic fantasy, but the Russians have it too. It's not maybe as biblically old school like the Jews, but they do have. They think of themselves as a heavenly people that has this historical destiny to do some things that include Istanbul or Constantinople, as you would say, and the big empire and all the other stuff. So basically, you have is the story that I mean the Ukrainians and let's say we in the Balkans are very familiar with. Is the part of the old narrative or the religious wars that went on between, let's say, the heavenly peoples and the unholy or the genocidal people on the other side. So it's when you are talking about the real difference or the crux of the matter, you don't have much place that you can stand on and defend the stuff. Maybe you, Alexander, okay, just leave the Americans aside and the neoconservatives and stuff. We have this in the Balkans. We have this long, let's say the Croatians and the Serbs have this long history of that is not very pleasant. There is a lot of bad blood spilled here. So I have a question that I wanted to ask you before, but I never got an opportunity to ask you. So you have this lot of people died in this Croatian-Serb interaction. What I wanted to ask you is, what if the Croatians were not Catholics? Would it be, let's say, less nasty, or it would be? What are your opinions here? What do you say?
Well, I will definitely answer your question. Just give me half a minute to make 2 points. First point is regarding Ukraine, is that actually don't be fooled by the media. The Russian armies, by many people in Ukraine, and I've seen the footage, are seen as the liberators, especially in the eastern part, but also in some parts of the middle Ukraine, because they get rid of, these neo-Nazi types. And let's not forget, during the last 8 years, 14,000 Russian civilians died from the shelling from these Nazis. Every day, every week, someone will die, So it's not black and white. Some people hate Russians, some people are indifferent, they just want to live their lives. And some people see them as saviors, liberators, honest to God. Just like in Europe in 1940s, when the Soviet army stormed in, somebody hated them, somebody liked them. Regarding the Jewish thing, I think it's the old conflict. Maybe we can go to Kaiser times. Basically, Jewish people, I had, friends and acquaintances of Jewish people. Most of them dislike Russians to a certain extent. But Eastern European Jews very much dislike the Russians and the Orthodox. Most of them do. That's almost pathological. And there is a sort of need for vengeance against the Jews, probably because they destroyed their Khaganate and because of the 19th century events and that pogrom that 55,000 people were killed because of the killing of the Tsar Alexander II, etc. So most of the people who are involved in this conflict from the American side are the Neocons. And the Neocons are mostly Eastern European Jews. And Mr. Jones, more and more people, actually, at least in Serbia, are talking about that openly. It might not be the main subject of the discussion, but some very smart people who, write for foreign newspapers or appear on Russia TV as the contributors are mentioning that, Jewish factor in the entire thing. The Neocons, the Eastern European Jews who once through their proxy war attaining something, avenging their grandfathers and great-great-grandfathers. That's dangerous. Now, regarding your question, I think if the Croats were, let's say, Orthodox, there will be much less hatred. I'll tell you why. Because we perceive, and I personally perceive, the practical activities of the Catholic Church as a, imperial entity throughout the history. It has some elements of empire, the wars, the, imposing of their view of Christianity. So that's the thing why there is a long-lasting hatred among some Serbs and some Croatians. Not all of them. Also, I must say that honestly, especially in some circles in Serbia, I think the idea of mutual lifetime in the future under a common union or, I don't know, some confederation 50, 100 years from now, it's not dead. So, on one hand, you have pathological hatred between Serbs and Croats with some people. On the other hand, you have some usually neo-Titoists, neo-communist types who hope that one day their children or their grandchildren will live together in some sort of South Slavic country.
Okay, but
That's, I think.
my question was, it's obviously a religious war because we are religious-based identities here. So
Yeah.
what I wanted to, and this has its parallels with Ukraine, because in Ukraine you have a certain percentage of Catholics, but you also have the Uniates, as they are called by the Russians, or their official name is the Greek Catholic Church of Ukraine. It's basically the Orthodox Rite, but they do everything as the Orthodox do, but they recognize the Pope as the ultimate authority. So, do you think they are problematic? I mean, are the Catholics a problem here? I mean, let's say not we, let's say Croatians that happen to have this religion, but let's say this church and this religious system is the same problem here as it is here, or so basically it's according to you it's a negative factor basically.
There are a lot of similarities, definitely. West of Ukraine, Lvov, it's Catholic. East of Ukraine is Orthodox, and
Western Ukraine was Poland until Stalin moved the borders.
I'm sorry?
The western part of the Ukraine was Poland until Stalin moved the borders. He moved Eastern Germany into Poland and Eastern Poland into the Ukraine.
Yeah.
So but Stalin it was typical of the divide and conquer mentality that the British used in the British Empire, where basically you leave an ethnically divided entity behind after you withdraw. So like India was immediately broke down into India and Pakistan because it wasn't stable. Nigeria, you have the Muslims in the north and you have the Catholics in the south. It was the same type of thing. When I was in Poland, I was in actually East Prussia. Okay, so this was a traditionally German area. The man is taking me around. These are all German farms, and they're run by Ukrainians.
Right.
The Ukrainians have been taken, as Stalin took them out of the Ukraine and put them in the German depopulated areas where the ethnic cleansing of the Germans had taken place, because he wanted it was a divided population, Poles and Ukrainians, divided.
Yeah. So we are talking basically here about, I was trying to talk about this religious war. So basically, do you see these Uniates or these, let's say, the Orthodox that do recognize the Pope, let's say, as the ultimate authority? Are they seen as a threat, or are they seen as more as a friendly guys?
Not so much, because there aren't too many of them on the territory of Serbia.
No, in the Ukraine. There are like 5 million.
More of them in Romania, in Ukraine, these unions, than in Serbia. So most of the common people are not even aware of these unions. They do exist, especially north of Belgrade, but they're not a significant factor.
No.
Picture here is more black and white. Catholics, Orthodox, Muslims in Bosnia and Kosovo, period.
Yeah.
Are we going to live in peace? Oh, by the way, one thing. When this mess in Ukraine ends up, there is a chance, and I am giving it 50-50 at the moment, that we'll have more troubles in Balkans.
Yeah, of course they will. Of course they will. Actually,
no. But the empire, people are tired of wars and everything, but the empire will need a proxy war.
Is it true? I got an information that the Russian embassy, I don't know if it's true, I just repeating what I heard, that the Russian embassy in Sarajevo rang Dodik, that is a Bosnian Serb leader, and reminded him of his promise that he gave to them, like time ago, to secede. I mean, to announce independence. Have you heard of it?
I don't believe that's true, because until now Russians were very delicate about their foreign policy, to the point that many pro-Russian, pro-Orthodox people were critical of Putin for not doing much for years. On my opinion, Putin was buying time by, sustaining the slaps, sustaining the offenses by foreign Western diplomats, and working on the rearmament of the Russian army, development of new technologies. And when he attained that, and he definitely did, because they have some amazing new types of weapons right now, then he became more active. Someone would say more aggressive. But I think he was buying time. That's my view. I don't have proof of that, but I think his military factories and military institutes, research institutes, were working under tremendous pressure for the last 15 years or so, since the Munich conference.
Yeah.
This was the goal. Now we see why Putin was so meek and for so many years. In terms of politics, in terms of confronting, directly NATO, interfering in their interests, etc.
Okay, what I see, let's say the big picture that I see here is basically that Putin definitely, the Russia definitely operates in this let's say ethno-religious operating system that is the heavenly people on the messianic mission, and you have all these things that fits into it. So basically, any opponent of such heavenly people must be a Nazi or a genocidal. Some kind of genocidal
I don't think
people.
that's true.
No,
I think
I would disagree. Also.
Okay.
I think that Putin was forced into this situation by
who forced him?
Inexorable movement of NATO eastward. He warned them in 2008. He said, Ukraine will never become a member of NATO. So
exactly.
don't. Look, when you're dealing with the real messianic people, they don't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with people who start the conversation by saying, I have relatives who died in the Holocaust, you're not going to have any diplomacy. And that's precisely what happened. And you had this ancestral Jewish animus against Russia operative through the American foreign policy. That's the cause of this problem. It's not Russia. Russia is defending itself. It's NATO is the aggressor in this war.
Okay, NATO is on the Russian border since 1949. You can throw a stone from Norway to Murmansk. Basically, NATO. First of all, both Macron.
Finland is a neutral state. That's all they wanted in the Ukraine. Finland is neutral.
I'm talking about Norway.
No,
I'm talking about Norway. Okay.
Norway's too far away.
It's on the Russian border. It's near Murmansk. Okay, never mind. Latvia and Estonia and the Baltics are on the Russian border, and they are 600 miles away from Moscow, where they are already in NATO. What's the fuss? And basically, to be honest, they never said that they are attacking Ukraine in order not to be in the NATO, but they are attacking Ukraine to denazify it. Plus, I don't know if you've seen what Macron and the German Chancellor, what were their messages said to Putin regarding Ukraine and NATO. So what both of the guys, the French and the German guys, told Putin is that they will not accept Ukraine in NATO, and the other thing why Ukraine could not come into NATO, because parts of the Ukraine, as you know it, are under Russian control. So basically, immediately, if such a country that has parts of its territory basically in the state of some kind of war or some kind of insurrection, if it enters NATO, it means automatic war. No country that has territorial disputes or some kind of ongoing conflicts cannot enter NATO. And plus, the NATO members must have a vote to let her in. So basically, the NATO thing is just I think is bogus. what we are seeing here is the thing I told you on the beginning. It's 1994 Bucharest Agreement that was violated. So now you have to grab as much as territory you can. You cleanse the Ukrainian population. You seize the nuclear facilities. That's simple. I mean, the Russians are obviously much more powerful than the Ukrainians, and they might do it. But the operation itself is
still defensive, not offensive. I
mean, how many defensive there are on the Ukrainian side?
If it were Texas, you know, I might consider your point, but it's not Texas. It's the Ukraine. The Americans are on the Russian border. It's not the Russians on the American border. The Russians have a legitimate sphere of influence, and they have a right to defend themselves.
How does the legitimate sphere? Wait a minute. The legitimate sphere. I have just sorry, Alexander. The legitimate sphere of influence is the same thing as saying might makes right, or the truth is opinion of the powerful.
No.
Is the exactly same kind of argumentation. I don't think that
absolutely not, Tony, because this is why this war is taking so much. Unlike Iraq, let's say excursion in Iraq, Russians are very meticulous about not killing the civilians. Very careful about that, as much as you can be in this war, you know. On the other side, the Ukrainian Nazis are putting their howitzers in the buildings with civilians. And that's deja vu. We saw that in Sarajevo, you know. You want to force the enemy to kill your population so you can gain some, you know, points on the international political market. You know, they're doing the same thing. You have howitzers right now in Kiev and Mariupol and other cities.
So basically, if you are a superpower and you trick another nuclear superpower to get rid of its weapons, and then when the other country does it, then you invade her. That's like what, moral behavior, or it's legitimate demands, or what are we talking about?
Your own country.
What?
You cannot invade your own country.
How do you mean your own country?
Because Ukraine was under Russia for many centuries, and Russia as a state was conceived in Kiev. History of Russia is divided in three parts: the Kievan Russia, Muscovite Russia, and St. Petersburg Russia. Now it's Muscovite again. So, you know, the communists actually made this mess in the beginning of the 20th century. That was pretty much one country, you know.
Okay, it was one country, but now you see the people living there considering themselves Ukrainian. I mean, you don't have to do a historical analysis if the people are telling you that they are Ukrainians. So, I don't see it.
But how would you react if the island of Mljet wants to secede from Croatia? Because people from island of Mljet or the island of Brač figure out that they are, you know, a separate nation. Would you give them a green light?
Okay, the Ukraine is not seceding from Russia. Ukraine is already a country, and it was a country in the Soviet Union. You know, you're just telling me that there are Nazis in Ukraine, that Ukrainians are Nazis because they're fighting Russians?
No.
I didn't say that.
Ukrainian, not all the Nazis, Tony. We were very clear about that.
So they are Russians or are they Nazis?
Don't give a damn about that. They want to live their lives, you know, pay their bills. But you have these, I don't know, 100,000 maniacs, which is not terribly much considering it's a country of 30, 40 million people.
So you have to basically level the entire country.
I'm sorry?
I don't find it persuasive that for this Azov battalion, that by the way, I googled it up and I didn't see any Nazi, you know, flags or something like that in there. They do seem like a reasonable squad, that it's a part of the Ukrainian military system. But okay, but it's not.
They
We are not.
they are the
I
Muslim
understand. I understand that the Russians would like to.
Man being crucified, poured with gasoline, and then burned alive as a battalion. I can send you a clip.
Okay.
They are the Mujahideen of the Ukraine. They are the ISIS of the Ukraine. They are not representative of the Ukrainian people. They are a weaponized proxy warrior of the West.
We are talking about one unit. This is a country this is the biggest European country if you don't count the
You don't need
USSR.
a majority of the population in order to wreak havoc. You can always have a small fanatical minority who can take over the government. It's the story of Russia, story of the Bolsheviks.
I don't think are you saying that the majority of Ukrainians want the Russians to come in and to invade the country?
I'm saying we don't know what the majority of the Ukrainians want because no one is asking them.
Majority of Ukrainians are fleeing the Russians in the direction of the Western Europe. We have in Croatia the Ukrainian refugees, for God's sake.
I have people telling me that they're fleeing Kiev because they don't want to be drafted into the Ukrainian army.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gonzalo Lira said that. Do you know a guy named Gonzalo Lira? Gonzalo Lira is an American businessman who used to live in Kiev, and now he moved to Kharkov for the safety issues. And he's a good guy, talkative, and he's right in the middle of fire, and he's making his podcast on a good English every day. And he explained a lot of things, we're discussing right now. And he's saying pretty much the same thing that Mr. Jones and I are saying. It's not black and white. Some people like Russians, especially in the East. Some people, dislike them. And some people want to bury Russia, 10 feet under the ground, every Russian.
Okay. Some people do what, some people don't. But do you have some, we have to have some objective way of evaluating the situation, okay? So Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, which is a noble thing, okay? They got some promises, that the promises were broken, okay? And Russia is a mighty country, but I don't think that it's persuasive that gives them a right to I don't know, to partition Ukraine or to level to lay siege on the cities. I mean, what's okay, the Russians have a strong military and they have this historical injustice made to them and blah blah, and they have this manifest destiny and stuff, but it does not fit. I mean, I cannot this narrative that is somehow moral for the Russians to invade Ukraine and to engage in these activities that are now going on. I'm sorry, I'm not convinced.
It's the nukes. The nukes.
Okay, so why the Russians are entitled to the nukes and the Ukrainians are not? Are they heavenly people? Is that why?
Look, wait a minute. The Ukrainian people have a choice right now of becoming the proxy warriors of NATO or being taken over by Russia. They are in the unfortunate situation of being in the middle, and that's the only choice they have. They cannot have some type of... The only independence they could have is as a neutral state, and that is being denied them by NATO, not by Russia, by NATO. NATO denied them that possibility in 2014 when they overthrew their government and put in Jewish puppets in charge of the place who were working to use the Ukrainian people as human shields to advance NATO within missile striking distance of Moscow.
NATO.
One more thing, Tony. Why was the Russian military attaché in Moscow was summoned up in Russian Ministry of Defense 3 days ago and asked, why so many Croatians fighting on the Nazi side?
Yeah, you have 200 Serbs fighting on the Russian side, so they are not Nazis. I guess they are freedom fighters, but some Croatian guys fighting there are Nazis. Yeah, this is not a convincing argument. So
well, you said it, you know.
Yeah. You have 200.
I have to make peace here between Croatia and Serbia. Right? We're gonna have the Balkan Wars again.
Yeah.
I gotta go.
Yeah, my battery is running out. Okay, nice talking to you
Can I
guys.
say one thing before we leave? A little joke, a local joke, to finish this conversation on good, positive notes. There is a rumor that Vladimir Putin is going to get a Nobel Award for medicine. Do you know why?
Because he ended the COVID pandemic.
Exactly.
I think it's because he resurrected Hitler and he's still fighting the Nazis. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Okay, bye guys.
Thanks. Peace.
Thank you, guys.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Peace.
Peace.
Bye.
Peace.